I walked into my parents' house and heard them yelling at my daughter. "Wash the dishes properly, you useless girl," while my sister's kids laughed. So I stopped paying for their home and watched the bank take everything one by one. I, 42 never imagined I'd be the kind of son who'd cut off his own parents financially. But life has a way of forcing your hand when you least expect it. My wife passed away 3 years ago from cancer. The treatment drained our savings, our hope, and eventually, her life. I was left with our daughter, who was 10 at the time, and a grief so heavy I could barely function. My parents stepped in during those first few months, and I was grateful. They helped with meals, picked her up from school, gave me space to fall apart, and somehow piece myself back together. I thought they were doing it out of love. Maybe they were initially. About a year after my wife died, my parents came to me with a problem. Their house was going into foreclosure. My father had made some bad investments, borrowed against the house, and now they were 3 months behind on payments. My sister, who lived 2 towns over with her husband and 2 kids, suggested they sell and downsize. But my mother broke down crying, saying that house held 40 years of memories, that losing it would kill her. I couldn't stand seeing her like that. So I stepped in. I paid off the back payments and started covering their mortgage every month. It was steep, nearly $2,000 a month, but I'd been promoted at work, and I figured it was the least I could do for the people who raised me. That arrangement went on for 2 years. 2 years of me working 60-hour weeks, skipping vacations, driving a 10-year-old car, while my paycheck went toward keeping their house afloat. My daughter and I lived modestly. She never complained, never asked for the latest gadgets or expensive clothes. She was a good kid, quiet and thoughtful, still processing the loss of her mother in her own way. Then came that Thursday afternoon in early September. I'd left work early for a dentist appointment that got canceled last minute. Instead of heading home, I decided to swing by my parents' place to pick up my daughter. She'd been staying there after school most days while I worked late. I had a key, so I let myself in through the front door, expecting to find her doing homework at the dining table like usual. Instead, I heard shouting coming from the kitchen. My mother's voice, shrill and angry, cut through the house. She was yelling at someone to wash the dishes properly, calling them useless. Then I heard laughter, the high-pitched cackling of children finding something hilarious. I walked faster toward the kitchen, my stomach already tightening with unease. When I rounded the corner, I saw my daughter standing at the sink, her shoulders hunched, scrubbing a plate with trembling hands. Her face was red and streaked with tears. My mother stood behind her, arms crossed, watching with disgust. My sister sat at the kitchen table with her 2 kids, who were about 8 and 11. They were giggling, pointing at my daughter, making comments about how slow she was, how she couldn't even clean a dish right. My sister wasn't stopping them. She was scrolling through her phone, occasionally smirking at whatever her kids were saying. My father was nowhere to be seen, probably in his study ignoring everything like he always did. I stood there frozen for maybe 3 seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. Then my mother noticed me. She didn't look guilty or embarrassed. She looked annoyed that I was there. She told me I was early, that I should have called first, like I'd interrupted something normal, something acceptable. I ignored her and walked straight to my daughter. I asked her quietly if she was okay. She didn't look at me, just kept scrubbing that same plate over and over, her hands shaking. I turned to my mother and asked what the hell was going on. She waved a hand dismissively and said my daughter had been lazy all afternoon, that she'd asked her to help with chores and the girl was doing a terrible job. My sister chimed in, saying kids needed to learn responsibility, that my daughter was too coddled. Her kids were still laughing in the background. Something inside me snapped. I told my daughter to get her things. She dropped the plate in the sink and practically ran out of the kitchen. I followed her, ignoring my mother's protests about overreacting and being too sensitive. My sister called after me, saying I was raising my daughter to be entitled. I didn't respond. I just walked out with my kid and drove home in silence. That night, after my daughter had cried herself to sleep, I sat in my living room staring at the wall. I replayed the scene over and over. The humiliation on her face, the cruelty in their laughter, the indifference from my own family. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the first time. Over the next few days, I started asking my daughter careful questions. At first, she didn't want to talk about it. But slowly, piece by piece, the truth came out. This had been going on for months. My parents had started treating her like a servant. She was made to clean up after my sister's kids whenever they visited, which was apparently several times a week. She had to do dishes, vacuum, fold laundry. If she didn't do it perfectly, my mother would berate her, call her useless, lazy, ungrateful. My sister's kids had picked up on the dynamic and started treating her like a maid too, bossing her around, laughing at her. My daughter had been too scared to tell me. She thought I'd be angry at her, or worse, that I wouldn't believe her. She'd already lost her mother. She couldn't risk losing me too. I felt like the worst father in the world. I'd been so focused on work, on keeping everything together financially, that I hadn't noticed my own child being abused right under my nose. I didn't confront my parents immediately. Instead, I made a decision. I pulled up my bank account and looked at the automatic payment I'd set up for their mortgage. $2,000, like clockwork, every month for 2 years. $48,000 I'd poured into that house. Money that could have gone toward my daughter's college fund, toward therapy for both of us, toward building a better life after losing my wife. I canceled the payment. Then I called my parents. I told them calmly that I would no longer be covering their mortgage. My mother immediately started crying, asking what they'd done wrong. How could I do this to them? My father got on the phone and demanded an explanation. I told them exactly what I'd witnessed, what my daughter had told me. There was a long silence. Then my father said I was being dramatic, that kids exaggerate, that a little discipline never hurt anyone. My mother said my daughter needed to learn respect for her elders. I hung up. My sister called an hour later. She screamed at me for abandoning our parents, for being selfish, for ruining the family. She said I was punishing everyone because I couldn't handle raising a kid on my own. I told her if she cared so much, she could pay their mortgage. She went quiet, then said she had her own family to take care of. I told her that was exactly my point. Then I hung up on her too. The first month, my parents tried to guilt me. They called constantly, left voicemails about how hurt they were, how ungrateful I was after everything they'd done for me. My sister sent long text messages about family loyalty and how I was going to regret this. I blocked them all. The second month, they tried a different approach. They showed up at my house unannounced, begging me to reconsider. My father looked older, more tired. My mother cried on my doorstep. They promised things would be different, that they'd apologize to my daughter. I told them they'd had 2 years to treat her with basic human decency, and they'd chosen cruelty instead. I closed the door. The third month, they stopped reaching out. I heard through a mutual family friend that they were trying to refinance, looking for ways to cover the payments themselves. My sister had apparently offered to help, but could only manage a few hundred a month. It wasn't enough. Month 4, the bank sent them a notice of default. Month 5, foreclosure proceedings began. I won't lie and say I felt nothing. These were my parents. The people who raised me, taught me to ride a bike, helped me through college. But every time I felt a pang of guilt, I'd look at my daughter. I'd see how much lighter she seemed, how she smiled more, how she'd started talking about her mother again without breaking down. She was in therapy now, processing everything, and her therapist told me she'd been showing signs of emotional abuse. That word, abuse, coming from a professional, made everything crystal clear. Month 6, they lost the house. I found out through the same family friend. My parents had moved in with my sister temporarily, and according to the friend, it was a disaster. My sister's husband wasn't happy about it. The house was too small for 7 people, and my parents were barely speaking to me or each other. My mother blamed my father for the bad investments. My father blamed me for abandoning them. My sister blamed everyone. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt no guilt either. They'd made their choices. They decided my daughter was less valuable than my sister's kids. They decided she deserved to be treated like a servant. And when confronted, they doubled down instead of apologizing. The bank sold their house at auction. Some young couple bought it, probably thrilled to get a deal in that neighborhood. I drove past it once, just to see. There were new curtains in the windows, a different car in the driveway. 40 years of memories, gone. My sister called me one final time after they moved out. She was furious, said I destroyed our parents' lives over nothing, that I was vindictive and cruel. She said her kids were asking why they couldn't visit Grandma and Grandpa's house anymore, and it was all my fault. I asked her if she'd taught her kids to apologize for mocking and bullying my daughter. She said kids will be kids. I told her she was raising monsters and hung up. We haven't spoken since. Update 1. It's been 4 months since my parents lost the house, and I figured I owed an update since some people asked what happened next. Things have been both better and worse than I expected. My daughter is thriving. She's in 7th grade now, and she's a different kid than she was a year ago. Her grades improved. She joined the art club at school, and she even made a few close friends. Her therapist says she's processing her grief in healthier ways, and that removing her from that toxic environment was the best decision I could have made. She still asks about her grandparents sometimes, but not with sadness. More like curiosity, like they're distant relatives she barely remembers. As for my parents, life hasn't been kind to them. Living with my sister turned into a nightmare for everyone involved. The arrangement lasted about 2 months before my sister's husband put his foot down. Apparently, my parents were critical of everything, from how my sister raised her kids to how she kept house. The final straw came when my father tried to discipline my sister's youngest for talking back, and my brother-in-law lost it. They gave my parents 30 days to find somewhere else to live. My parents ended up renting a small apartment in a rough part of town. From what I heard through that same family friend, they're struggling. My father's pride won't let him ask for help from anyone else, and my mother's health has deteriorated from the stress. They're both in their late 60s now, and the weight of everything has aged them badly. My sister reached out to me one more time about 3 months ago. She didn't call. She sent a letter, actual paper mail, probably because I'd blocked her number. In it, she wrote about how hard things had gotten, how our parents were suffering, how the family was fractured beyond repair. She blamed me for all of it, said I'd chosen revenge over forgiveness, that I was no better than the worst kind of person. But then, in the last paragraph, she did something unexpected. She apologized for not stopping her kids that day. She said she'd been so caught up in her own life that she didn't realize how bad things had gotten. She asked if there was any way we could reconcile, for the sake of the family. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table. My first instinct was anger. An apology buried under paragraphs of blame wasn't really an apology. But then I thought about my daughter, about the kind of man I wanted to be for her. Did I want her growing up watching me hold on to anger forever? Or did I want her to see that boundaries could coexist with grace? I wrote back. I kept it short. I told my sister that I appreciated the apology, but reconciliation would require real change, not just words. I said that if she wanted a relationship with me and my daughter moving forward, she needed to have an honest conversation with her kids about what they did and why it was wrong. I told her my parents would need to do the same. Until then, we'd remain cordial but distant. She never responded. Update 2. It's been almost a year since everything fell apart, and I'm writing this final update because something happened last week that I never saw coming. My father had a heart attack. Not a massive one, but serious enough to land him in the hospital for 5 days. My sister called me from the hospital, crying, saying I needed to come, that he was asking for me. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the hospital for 20 minutes, debating whether walking through those doors would undo all the progress my daughter and I had made. But I went. Not for him, really. For me. Because I needed to look him in the eye one more time and know that I'd done the right thing. He looked small in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, his skin gray and papery. My mother sat in the corner, barely acknowledging me when I walked in. My sister stood by the window, her arms crossed, looking exhausted. My father saw me and started crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that rolled down his cheeks. He told me he was sorry. Not in a defensive way, not with excuses. He said he'd been a terrible grandfather, that he'd failed my daughter, that he'd let his pride and his own problems blind him to what was happening in his own house. He said watching me walk away and lose everything made him realize how badly he'd destroyed our family. My mother didn't say anything. She just stared at the floor. I stood there, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't name. Part of me wanted to forgive him on the spot. Part of me wanted to walk out and never come back. Instead, I told him the truth. I said that what hurt the most wasn't the money or the house. It was that he'd watched my daughter, his own granddaughter who'd lost her mother, be treated like garbage, and he'd done nothing. I told him that sorry didn't erase the damage, but it was a start. He nodded, too weak to say much else. I stayed for 10 more minutes, then left. I haven't been back to see him since. My daughter asked if I wanted her to visit, and I told her it was her choice. She thought about it for a long time, then said no. She said maybe someday, but not yet. I respected that. My parents are still renting that apartment. My father's recovering slowly. My sister and I exchange polite texts every few weeks, mostly logistical things about family updates. It's not warm, but it's not hostile either. We'll probably never be close again, and I'm okay with that. As for me and my daughter, we're doing better than we've been in years. We took a real vacation this summer, just the two of us, to a cabin by a lake. We talked about her mom, looked at old photos, cried a little, laughed a lot. She told me she was proud of me for standing up for her, even when it was hard. I realized something during that trip. Revenge wasn't what I'd been after. I'd been after justice. I'd been after protecting my kid from people who should have loved her, but chose cruelty instead. And in doing that, I taught her something more valuable than money or family loyalty. I taught her that her worth wasn't negotiable, that she deserved to be treated with dignity, and that walking away from toxicity wasn't weakness. It was strength. The bank took everything from my parents one by one, but in losing them, I found something I didn't know I'd been missing: peace. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.